Hello everyone, this video is intended for anyone who's planning on buying a TT02, a Tamiya TT02 to set up for off-road rally use. What I've done is I bought the cheapest Tamiya TT02 that I could find. It was the road car standard setup, like the Supra version. The first thing I did was set it up with the high suspension setting. That's a thing that's in the instruction manual. You can just set it up to begin with a high suspension setting. That's pretty standard. Then I put in some bearings instead of the standard or the kit issued plastic and brass bushings. I would highly recommend using the ball bearings because of the amount of dust and dirt that gets into the car. So I wouldn't treat that as an optional. I would say that's a definite to get some sealed bearings. I've used two kinds of sealed bearings on it. There are the metal sealed ones and these blue rubber sealed ones. I can't tell the difference between them. They both seem to work fine, but you definitely need those. The next thing I did was, because this chassis is all open, you get a tremendous amount of dirt and dust and debris and stuff in there. And because of these cross braces, there are some gaps here that are very good at filling up with that debris and jamming your steering here. So really common, you'll see it in lots of YouTube videos. They will fill these, often with hot glue. I tried to be a bit fancier and fill it with some foam. I stuffed it full of foam and then put some epoxy resin over the top to try and get a nice smooth surface there, and that seems to have worked. That solves some problems with dust and debris jamming the steering. The next thing I did was this drive shaft here. So the plastic drive shaft that comes with the kit has ribs, so it's not smooth, it's ribbed, and it is very good at catching little bits of bark and rocks and jamming up. So nothing to do with performance. That aluminium drive shaft is there because it's thinner and it's smooth, and it doesn't get jammed up so much with debris. You'll notice there's a bit of like heat shrink here where the shaft outputs. That's to try and cover up the linkage in there and try and keep some of the dirt and dust out of there. You might also notice this piece of aluminium here, which is really designed to stop the power cables from the battery from touching the drive shaft, because I was worried that they were getting damaged because they were sitting up against the drive shaft. The next change was the steering rack here. So I replaced the plastic with that blue aluminium steering rack. Once again, nothing to do with performance. It's just about trying to stop debris from jamming things up. Whether that made any difference or not, I don't really know, but it works fine. The next thing after that was the lower suspension arms. So you see here I've got these blue aluminium suspension arms. Once again, that's nothing to do with the performance. It's about these ball joints here, because the original plastic one, those ball joints, they would, I assume, because they get filled up with dirt and debris, and it just acts like sandpaper and it wears away the little ball joint in there, and it gets smaller and smaller. It starts to get loose, and then it starts to pop out of the cup here. And once it's done it once, it just did it over and over again. So the main reason for changing to these aluminium ones was to try and stop that from happening. It seems to work so far. It hasn't really happened again since I got those. After that, I got some oil shocks, oil-filled shocks, to replace the friction shocks that came with the kit. I'm a rank amateur when it comes to RC cars, but even I could tell that these really made a difference. That's probably the first actual performance improvement that I made. So that's the front one. These are the Tamiya CVA mini shocks. And then on the back here, you can see there's a couple of enormous, completely inappropriately sized shock absorbers. They're from a buggy that died, and I just had them lying around because I didn't want to spend the money. I just thought I'll just use these. And they're so big and inappropriate that I had to make an extra aluminium bracket here to extend that shock mount so that I could accommodate them. But you know, they still work better than the friction shocks. Interestingly, these shocks, they are the absolute cheapest oil-filled shocks that I could possibly find for that buggy, and yet the last time I opened them up, these were perfect. They were full of oil and the oil was clean. The 2 times that I've had these shocks open, these Tamiya ones, once they were completely, like the oil had all drained out, they were empty, and the second time the oil was filthy. It was grey and opaque, so make of that what you will. The next thing I did was these drive shafts. You can see in there. So the kit comes with plastic dog bones that are really, like, they're very fat, they're very thick, and it was sort of limiting my suspension travel and my steering angle, so that's the reason for changing to these metal constant velocity joints there, and they seem to work really well. Then it was wheels and tires. So these wheels, the original kit came with you know, fancy looking imitation alloy wheels that had spokes and big holes in them. They were very good at catching sticks and jamming things up. These Tamiya full disc wheels are excellent. They don't do that anymore. I'll also just mention the hexes in here. On the original kit, this had like an imitation brake disc around it, just for looks, and it was also very good at getting rocks and things jammed inside the wheel here. So I cut that off, and that seems to have solved that problem. The tyres there, these are the Tamiya Rally Block tyres, and they're excellent. They work really well. I have also put a heatsink on the motor here. I run a 3S battery on this, and the motor seems to get super hot, so I put a heatsink, a little fan on there. The next thing I've noticed is this steering arm. Because I did all this work to try and improve the steering angle to get a better turning circle, and that means I adjusted the endpoint adjustment on my servo so that it would turn further, and this steering arm here started fouling on the drive shaft, the drive cup there. So I got my Dremel out and I shaved away some of the material so it wouldn't do that anymore. And then you can't see it, but I have actually broken that plastic rod there. So my next purchase is going to buy the metal rod kit that you can get for these steering linkages. After that, it's all about dust and debris, because it's all completely open. So anytime you drive it off-road, you just fill this whole area up with dirt and dust and rocks and bark and all that sort of stuff. So the main thing is to try and stop that from happening as much as you can. Now, I know there is a plastic cover that you can buy that goes off over all this. I haven't bought one of those. I've tried to make my own. This is it. And yes, I know how ugly that looks, but it actually works pretty well. It's made of fiberglass. So I'll just describe briefly how I did it. I got a piece of material. It was actually like bath towel, cut to shape here, and I laid it across all this stuff because I wanted it to be fairly close fitting, but I wanted a little bit of clearance between the cover and the components, so that gave me that. So towel on first, then I put cling film, like food wrap, over the whole thing, and then I fiberglassed over that and put pieces of wood to hold it against the side of the chassis here. There's actually a little lip on the chassis here, so when this goes on, it actually clips on to the chassis, and it holds fairly securely. You can also see there's a bit of leather here to try and keep rocks and things out of the steering assembly here, and there's a bit of foam in there as well to try to stop things from getting in and jamming up that steering assembly. And that it does work in the sense that it keeps bigger items out, things that are likely to jam up components. It doesn't keep all the dirt and dust out. It probably keeps, I don't know, 70-80% of the dirt and dust out, but yeah, every time you run it off-road, you just got to take it home and clean it with an air compressor or something, because that's just what happens. The next thing I'll mention, it's not specific to this vehicle, but I had a lot of trouble with switches as well. So obviously I want a switch that's external so that I can turn it on and off without taking the body off all the time. But I went through 3 different switches, even ones with rubber covers, and they all just stopped working, probably because of the dust. So I ended up using like essentially a jumper arrangement. So that is like a modified bind plug, and so when I plug it in, it's turned on, and when I pull it out, it's turned off, and that works every time. The other thing I'll mention is that the receiver I have in here has a built-in gyro that can be turned on via the transmitter. It's certainly much more challenging and more fun to drive it with the gyro turned off, and that's how I prefer it. But you know, if I was setting it up for a child or someone, I would really strongly consider getting the gyro, because it's like magic. You know, the car just magically does what you want it to do when you've got the gyro turned on. Probably the final thing to say is, if you're going to use the TT02 for off-road rally, you just got to accept that there's just going to be lots of servicing required, because dirt and dust just gets into everything, and it's just the way it is. I would certainly recommend having extra bearings available, because you know you really should probably change those reasonably frequently because they get jammed up. In conclusion, look, it's not designed for off-road really, but if you like fixing things and you like solving problems, then I would highly recommend it. It's good fun.